Well, the 30 minutes goes extraordinarily fast, as we've seen, so we'll just jump right in with some questions. Let's talk first. What would you say would be your top priority as Attorney General?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say thanks to all of you, particularly with MLive and the partners here for putting this on. You know, in a time when there's so many challenges to the news industry, this is an extraordinary commitment by you all, and just grateful to be a part of it. You know, so as Attorney General, my priority is going to be protecting families from crime, protecting families from violent crime, from economic crimes as well. And I would add to that for sure, protecting our Great Lakes and our great outdoors. I think it's incredibly important that we be strong stewards of the resources that we have. So those are going to be three of my priorities. You know, here's why that matters. The mission of the Attorney General is to keep people safe. And in our society today, if you find yourself getting ripped off, if somebody's trying to harm your family, and if you don't have a lawyer, good luck getting justice. It's a very complicated system. The problem is that lawyers are very expensive. I mean, the average price of a lawyer here in Michigan is $233 an hour. So if you need a lawyer for half day's work, you get a bill for over $1,000. Most families can't afford that. Certainly poor families, the vast majority of the middle class can't afford that. And so people really depend on having an attorney general who's going to stand up as their advocate, their lawyer, and their voice. And that's why I'm running. And I'm running because I just don't think we've had that for the last few years. I think, you know, my opponent has been focused on waging one extreme crusade after another that has left families all across our state less safe. And there's only so many hours in the day when you're spending your time arguing that foster kids would be better off as orphans, or when you're protecting drug companies when their products harm or kill, when you're arguing that bosses should be able to deny insurance coverage for contraceptives for women employees, then you are necessarily not spending an hour protecting families from crime. And so I want to return the office to what I think its core mission is, and that's going to be my focus.
Okay. Let's cut to the chase on one lingering issue in the campaign. Are you experienced enough to be Attorney General? Because your opponent has obviously suggested otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bill Schuette has mentioned this. I think this is probably the best he can get against me. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are serving time that wish what Bill Schuette was saying about me was true. Ask Timothy Sims. He is spending 31 years in federal prison because he tried to produce child pornography, and he effectively tried to rent kids to sexually abuse them. Ask Eric Wendland. He's spending time, or spent time in prison because he engaged in predatory lending that harmed families all across the west side of the state. Or ask Randy Sanford, who is spending time in prison because he beat his wife, and then he possessed weapons that he wasn't allowed to possess. So, you know, there's a lot of people who wish those lies about my experience were true. I have more than enough courtroom experience. What I don't have is the wrong kind of experience. I don't have experience, again, trying to raise taxes on Michigan families with health insurance or deny insurance coverage for contraceptives, trying to protect drug companies. I don't have that kind of experience. So I think there is a real question of experience here, and it's the question between the right kind of experience and the wrong kind of experience. You know, this race is in a dead heat right now. My opponent spent almost $2 million to get just barely a third of the vote right now. And we're going to work as hard as we can, and I'm going to bring these values into the office and try to return it to what I think its central mission ought to be.
So could you talk, I'm assuming you're referring to when you were a federal prosecutor, is that correct? Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more, tell all of us a little bit more about just what your experience is that you feel has really prepared you for this office? Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've had a number of different experiences. I started out serving in the U.S. Department of Justice. After that, I spent some time as an advisor to one of the federal judges on the U.S. Court of Appeals down in Washington, D.C. We came back home to raise our family. I have been teaching at MSU. I've been blessed to be able to train the next generation of prosecutors, of lawyers, of judges. And at the same time, I've also been serving as a federal prosecutor. And, you know, in that position was privileged to
protect the public from armed criminals, women from domestic abusers, seniors from predatory lenders, children from sexual predators, and those are the set of values that I'm going to bring into this office as the next Attorney General.
You made reference to some ideological issues as you perceive them with the current Attorney General. Can you talk about how you would be different?
You know, let me pick out one of the issues.
Okay.
We talked about, I talked about the argument that Bill Schuette's been pressing really since the beginning, that foster kids would be better off as orphans than having two gay parents. I would never make that argument. There is nothing in our state or federal constitution that requires Bill Schuette to make that argument. You know, as Attorney General, my role is to uphold the law, not my personal policy preferences. And in that case, I would uphold, consistent with my oath of office, I would uphold the federal Constitution. You know, it was clear 2 years ago in a case that the Supreme Court handed down what the guiding principles would be in that case. And since that time, there have been a nearly unprecedented string, with one exception, of 40 state and federal courts which have rejected Bill Schuette's argument. And, you know, the question that, the issue about what I would do when I get in office, I think is pretty straightforward. In determining, you know, whether I'm going to appeal a case, I will look at the cost of the appeal, I'll look at the harm that it causes, I'll look at the likelihood of success. And I think on all three of those, this case very quickly fails. And so I would not move forward with that appeal. You know, another example I'll talk about is, you know, Bill Schuette was the leading advocate against a state-based healthcare exchange here in Michigan. In fact, Governor Schneider was calling for a state-based health exchange, and Bill Schuette helped lead the charge against it, and he won. And so the federal government instead imposed one on us. And then he went to federal court back in February, and he asked a federal court to deny Michigan families tax credits to be able to purchase health insurance. If he wins this case, there are up to 500,000 families that will see their taxes rise by around $5,000. Now, you know, I just can't imagine using the power of that office to take that kind of position. These are families who are working hard, many of them holding 2 jobs, and, you know, there are clearly problems with the healthcare law. There are clearly problems, but the answer is to not raise taxes on Michigan families.
Let me go back to something you said at the very beginning of that discussion, is you said you would uphold the federal Constitution. I found that an interesting, what about the Michigan Constitution? Because obviously in our editorial board, your opponent talks specifically about upholding the Michigan Constitution, which specifically bans the marriage between gay couples. So what's your position on that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the Attorney General is tasked with enforcing, upholding, defending the law. That includes state statutes, that includes the state constitution, that includes the federal constitution. The Attorney General takes an oath of office to uphold the state and federal constitution. And this is a case where there's a conflict between the state and federal constitution. There's no question. It's well established that at the end of the day, if there's a conflict, the federal constitution prevails. And as I mentioned, you know, the Supreme Court 2 years ago laid down the principles in a key case that was handed down that guide this effort. And since then, there have been 40 state or federal courts that have rejected Bill Schuette's arguments. That's almost unprecedented in modern history of the courts. And consistent with my oath of office to uphold the federal Constitution, I would drop that appeal.
So theoretically, if there was you would always give preference then to the federal Constitution over the Michigan Constitution, regardless of what the issue is?
I don't have a choice. I mean, that's okay. What the law is. The federal Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and I take an oath of office to uphold the state and federal Constitution. If there's a conflict, there's just no question that the federal Constitution prevails. Okay.
On to our next topic. On your website, you actually reference a couple of different items that have a legislative component to them to some degree. For instance, advocating for education was one that struck out. How do you propose doing that? How are you going to incorporate that into the job of Attorney General?
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. So the Attorney General has, obviously all the kind of formal powers in terms of being the lawyer for the state, directing resources to protect families through investigations or bringing court cases where necessary to protect families. There's also a set of more kind of informal powers where the AG has the power to help shape the larger political process. And, I think any strong, proactive Attorney General is going to have a set of legislative measures where they're going to try to be a voice to help shape what the law should be. They don't have a vote, but the AG has the ability to direct the public's attention to issues that matter. So I'll mention a few that will be important to me. We talked earlier about the drug immunity law. Bill Schuette was the primary force behind Michigan's drug immunity law. We're the only state in the nation that says if you're harmed or killed by a prescription drug, you are absolutely helpless to do anything about it in the courts. And I think that law is wrong, and I will make that a priority to try to repeal that law and make clear to the public the cost that has inflicted on Michigan families. Let me mention another one. Every state in the nation has what's called a consumer protection law. It is the Attorney General's primary weapon to protect Michigan families when there are scammers who are trying to rip them off. Ours is virtually dead. It was passed in 1975. Governor Milliken called for it, worked with Frank Kelly. It is the bread and butter of what state attorneys general use around the nation to protect families. And Bill Schuette has been silent about the fact that he does not have the weapons he needs to protect families. And so I'm going to help lead the charge. I've written on this already in terms of just simply asking the legislature to restore a law that was passed by a strong bipartisan majority before our state Supreme Court interpreted it in a way that I think was wildly wrong, to restore the law to what the legislature intended when Governor Milliken and Frank Kelly pushed for its passage.
So you'll bring a voice to these issues,
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So how do you effectively lobby the legislature, in your opinion? And is that something that, as voters, we should look to you as Attorney General and say, if you can't get these laws changed, that's something we should hold against you when we vote next time?
Well, I mean, I think, obviously there are all kinds of factors that will depend upon the success of an Attorney General. Let me give you another example. I have some concern that the laws that protect children, for example, from child predators may not be strong enough. The federal laws are significantly stronger, for example, on child pornography. And I at least want to look closely at those laws and ask whether our state laws are strong enough to protect families in the state. It's certainly the case that there are lots and lots, far too many of cases that are never brought, that need to be brought to be able to protect children in the state. And so, if after looking at those laws and looking at what other states are doing and if I make a conclusion that those laws aren't strong enough, my job is to protect families. And so I'm going to stand up. I'm going to try to build, strong bipartisan support in the legislature to pass a law that would be directly relevant to the work of the Attorney General in protecting families, keeping them safe.
Another topic entirely here. So a number of cities have actually decriminalized possession of marijuana. Would you support the state of Michigan doing the same thing?
Yeah. No, so let me get to that in just 1 second. But let me start by talking about what we already have. So back a few years ago, the voters passed a medical marijuana law. 63% of the voters said they wanted a safe and effective medical marijuana system. Now, I've talked with prosecutors all across the state, and they're frustrated by the law. They're frustrated because there are a lot of ambiguities in the law, and many of them just don't know what to do in certain situations. And so, unfortunately, I think my opponent in many times has been a stumbling block to that law. He's tried to be an obstacle. At one point, he argued that the Michigan law violated the federal Constitution because the state had to make medical marijuana illegal because federal law required it, and that's a bogus argument that lost in every court that it was presented to. So I want to be a problem solver. I want to try to clarify that law, give the certainty, the clarity that law enforcement needs to create what the voters wanted, which is a safe and effective medical marijuana system. Beyond that, you've asked about decriminalization. Look, my number one priority is to make sure that our families and especially our children are kept safe. There are a few states right now, 2 in particular, that have decriminalized across the state. You know, I'm certainly open to watching what happens in those states. I think I want to always make decisions based on the best data, research that is available, but I'm certainly don't see at this point in time that that's the right direction to go. You know, I mentored a kid for several years who grew up in just with all kinds of strikes against him, and I took him hiking, I took him to church with me on Sundays, he helped us do some renovation on the house, and when he got to high school, after I'd been with him for about 4 years, he started getting involved in marijuana, and it was just like I lost him. I mean, he wasn't focused anymore on school. I felt like a lot of, and so I want to be especially focused on making sure that we keep marijuana out of the hands of our kids. And in terms of decriminalization, not now, but obviously with any decision, I'm going to look at the best data and research that's available. And we've got a couple states that will give us that data that we need.
Okay, so to clarify, it's something that you'll want to continue studying. Is that where you are now? Or
I do not support decriminalization
okay.
At this point. I think with anything, with any area of public policy, you want to look at the best data and research that's available and see what's happening. And we, you know, as I mentioned, we've got the state of Colorado and Washington that are, you know, have made significant changes. And I think, you know, we can wait and watch and see what happens there. And if there are results, you know, I'll want to look into them and see where that data leaves. But I don't think we have that. We don't at all have that data right now.
All right, thank you. And let's talk a little bit more about the Affordable Care Act. You've obviously criticized the current Attorney General for his position on this. Can you give us a little bit more detail on what you think the proper role would have been, where you want to see the state go from here?
So there was a debate, you know, a year or two ago about whether we would have a state-based health exchange or a federal-based exchange. And Governor Schneider was calling for a state-based exchange. And my opponent, Bill Schuette, led the fight to have against a state-based exchange. He was called out by the editorial page of the Detroit News, which said, "Bill Schuette, you're showing your partisan stripes." And you know, I think he was doing this to try to score points with the far right of his party. I don't think that's what we want an attorney general to be doing. Then what he did after he won that fight, he then turned around and he went to a federal court in Washington, D.C. He did this back in February of this year, and he asked that court to deny Michigan families, because they had a federal exchange and not a state exchange, to deny Michigan families tax credits to purchase health insurance. And as I mentioned, there are up to 500,000 Michigan families that will see their taxes rise by, on average, $5,000 if he finally wins that case. And I just think that's outrageous that the officer who is tasked who is charged with the task of protecting people in the state would actually be trying to harm them. As I mentioned, look, there are clearly problems with the health care law. We don't fix that law by raising taxes on Michigan families. And what he did is exactly what's wrong with American politics today, where we have politicians who are far more interested in trying to score political points with the far right or the far left of their party, rather than solving the very real problems that real people in our state face. And I would never do that. I would take a very different direction in this case.
Let's talk about an issue that's near and dear to at least the editorial board's heart here, and that is Michigan's Freedom of Information Act, Open Meetings Act. You have said that you believe there are some loopholes that should be closed. Can you detail that for us, please?
Yeah, so the two laws, the Freedom of Information Act, the Open Meetings Act, they're incredibly important for democracy. They ensure that the public has access to the political process, that they can be there when decisions are made, that they can know what happens, with a few exceptions, but they can know what happens behind closed doors. And the media plays an incredibly important role. Anybody can exercise these laws to obtain information, but the media is especially important in terms of making sure that the public knows what's happening. And I don't think we have I think we have laws that need to be reformed. There's a package that's been moving through the legislature. I certainly think we need to have some standardized costs so that entities subject to this law can't simply jack up the copying prices to try to discourage people. There needs to be time limits on them as well. Let me give you a specific example. You'll remember the Skunk Works project, this kind of behind doors program that Governor Schneider was running to it looked like try to put perhaps a voucher system in place in schools. It was composed of both government workers and non-government workers. And Rich Baird, the government's assistant, instructed all of the government workers not to use their government emails. Now, why was he doing that? He was doing that because if they did use their emails, even they were doing government work, it'd be accessible by the FOIA law. It was questionable whether it would be accessible outside of it. And so, as I've written in an op-ed, as Attorney General, it's pretty straightforward and easy. I would issue a formal opinion, which would be binding on executive agencies, unless the Supreme Court says otherwise, a formal opinion saying that when government workers use personal emails for public purposes related to their job, those emails are subject to FOIA. Because right now, that is a loophole that you could drive a truck through. And we need to, this is one example, and there's other areas as well. We need to strengthen those laws because they're so important to making sure we have a strong and transparent democracy.
So can we talk just a little bit more specifics about what you see those loopholes are? I get it, right, on using the government email for government business and the cost you referenced. Are there other loopholes that you're referencing, or are those the major ones?
Well, I think, there's larger issues too right now. I mean, we have this huge exemption for the governor and for the legislature. Mm-hmm. And, we're an exception among what other states have done. This is a legislative change. What I mentioned about the loopholes, I could issue a formal opinion to address that, to remedy that issue the day I take office if I want. These other issues are going to require legislative changes. I think there are ways to much more narrowly, to create the exceptions that are necessary for the governor to be able to do the job, get the counsel that the governor needs, but still create broad access under the state FOIA laws. I think it's an anomaly as well that the legislature is just totally exempted from the FOIA law. And so, again, I don't have a vote in the legislature, but I have a voice, and I will be an active voice seeking in some of these broader legislative reforms to try to strengthen the state FOIA law.
Let's talk about mandatory sentencing guidelines. Do you support Michigan's current system, or do you think that there should be changes to it?
Look, I will be guided by two fundamental principles in making these types of decisions. First of all, I am going to make sure that people are held accountable for their crimes. In some cases, that means that people need to spend the rest of their lives in jail, if that's necessary for accountability. The second principle is that I'm going to make sure that we are protecting the public. Those are my two guiding principles: accountability for crimes and making sure that the public is protected. Now, there's a bipartisan effort which is underway. Every branch of government is involved in it, and both sides are involved in it as well, to look at our sentencing laws, to look more broadly at our criminal justice system, to see if there are reforms that need to be made. I want to look very closely at that information as it continues to come in. I know there's a commission that's working very closely on it, and consistent with those principles. I'm never going to violate those principles, but if there are ways consistent with those principles, I'm going to be a strong partner in this effort. Sometimes we talk a lot about being tough on crime. Sometimes being tough on crime means being smart on crime. And that means making sure that we are providing the proper incentives, especially to make sure that when people leave prison, they're not returning to prison. Our policy in the past used to be just to warehouse idle prisoners and then one day to dump them out on the street. And that created more victims because of the higher rate of reoffending. We've got a great program that's been a model around the nation, the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Program. Unfortunately, its funding has been pretty significantly slashed in the last couple of years. And, that's an incredibly important program, one, because it saves us money. For sure, it saves us money. And two, because it's actually critical to keeping our families safe. We have to make sure that when people leave prison, and the fact of the matter is the vast majority of people do, when they leave prison, that they're prepared to re-enter society as lawful working, law-abiding citizens.
And how do we do that? What sort of ways can we help transition those leaving prison into the community?
I think, and again, I think there's ways to continue. We need to more strongly fund it. We need to continue to strengthen it. But, part of what we do is we start thinking about these issues the day a person enters prison. We start thinking about, well, what is the plan for transitioning this person? We start thinking about, what are the underlying problems? If somebody is in prison for a drug-related crime and there are addiction issues and we never address the addiction issues and then we dump them out on the street, we are going to leave the community less safe, because not only is that person probably going to reoffend, they are also likely, statistically, going to commit increasingly violent offenses. And so from the day a person enters prison, and the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Program adopts this philosophy, we need to start thinking about, what's going to be the plan, what needs to happen for this person to reach the end goal of being a lawful, working, law-abiding citizen.
What would you do as Attorney General to protect the Great Lakes, if anything?
There's lots of things I can mention. Let me mention one thing that's incredibly important. There is a 61-year-old pipeline that goes under the Straits of Mackinac that I am incredibly worried about. I do not have the assurance that I need that that pipeline is not going to leak. And there are some harms that are so unthinkable that you never want to be in the position of cleaning up after them. You always want to prevent them from happening in the first place. I can't imagine having a catastrophic oil spill in the Great Lakes. And so I am going to use every single power I have to make sure that we're not in that position. Let me be very specific. I will have, as Attorney General, all the authority I need to require and implement full, public, transparent hearings to examine every inch of that pipeline. My opponent has refused to do that. He's ordered the company, the Enbridge company, to do some things that they were already issued a press release and said they were well underway doing. He's refused to require certification under this existing law. He's refused to have full, open, public, transparent hearings, which I think is incredibly important. The corporation that owns this pipeline is one that doesn't have the best reputation in Michigan, the Enbridge Corporation. And I know because I grew up in Kalamazoo, and that's where my family lives. They were responsible for the largest on-land oil spill in the history of the nation. And so when they're telling us right now that we should just trust them because they've looked at the data and it's safe, I'm sorry, that's not enough. We need to be involved, and as Attorney General, I'm going to help lead that fight to make sure that we have the confidence we need.
Let's talk about Michigan's open carry of firearms right now. Is there a law needed to clarify who, what, when, where, why, how, to use some journalism terms there? I mean, should there be any tweaks to the system of Michigan's open carry right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first of all, let me say I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I have my CPL. I actually clerked for the judge who decided the Heller case, one of the biggest Second Amendment cases in the last 75 years. I agree that it's an individual right. I want to make sure that Michigan families can hunt, protect their families. I also think that it's compatible with restrictions to keep the public safe. And so we want to make sure that there are adequate protections. I think on the open carry issue, there's certainly been a few episodes where people have been concerned. I also don't want to create problems that don't exist. And I think I want to continue to watch. I guess I haven't seen enough evidence right now that we need a legislative change. But I do believe that my commitment to the Second Amendment is compatible with reasonable restrictions to keep the public safe. And if we get in the position where we need to make some changes, I'm certainly going to look very closely at the issue.
What do you see as the proper role for the Attorney General in stepping in on local criminal investigations and taking them to court?
So county prosecutors generally are on the front lines of protecting families from of prosecuting criminal cases. We have 83 counties in the state. Each one has an elected county prosecutor, and the vast majority of those cases go through to there. Now there's certainly a role in terms of prosecuting those cases for the Attorney General to play. There's a couple ways that the AG has a role to play. The AG has special resources. For example, if there you know, if there is a county which is maybe a small county, maybe only has a half-time prosecutor. There's a couple of counties I've been to that only have part-time prosecutors. Then if they have, say, a bodiless murder where they don't have the victim, they don't have the body of the victim, you know, that takes a special set of resources, people with particular expertise. Sometimes there's also technology that some of these smaller counties may not have. And so the Attorney General has to be a strong partner in providing those. I think it's very important, I will say, to listen to the county prosecutors, to make decisions by consensus, to partner with them, to provide resources, and to make sure that I'm meeting with them and talking with them on a regular basis so that I have a real understanding of what their issues are. And that's why, you know, when I started on this journey 2 years ago, as I've traveled around almost every county, I've met with sheriffs and prosecutors all around the state so that I don't step into office having to build a bunch of relationships, but I've already had that process underway.
Okay. And for our final question here, would you also tell us, if elected, what would you judge yourself on whether or not you've achieved your success? So you as a person, what do you need to achieve in order to feel as if you've been successful?
I want to have the confidence that Michigan families think of me in a very real sense as being their lawyer, their advocate, and their voice. Now this is what I so respect about Frank Kelly, who I'm just thrilled to have received the endorsement from. He was Michigan's longest serving Attorney General. He served for 37 years, actually the nation's longest serving Attorney General. And as I've talked with people around the state about his legacy, I mean, people think of him as being, you know, as their attorney. He was the people's lawyer in a sense. He was somebody who was there when there were harms that affected, you know, vast portions of people across the state. And I want to, you know, if I don't get the sense that people view me as the place they go if they're harmed, if they're not, you know, if they're not reaching out to my office, if they don't think of the Attorney General as being their advocate and their voice, then I will not have done my job. And that's exactly why I'm running for this office, because, you know, the law is incredibly complicated. I finished my first year of law school, my first semester of law school, and I knew very little about, at that point, one semester, about a lot of the different areas of law. What I did know is how to get the right answer. And I vowed to myself that I would never forget that feeling when I first started law school about how complicated the law is for most people who face the law a dozen times every day and can feel so overwhelmed by the system. And so I want to try to return this office to being an advocate, a champion for people who otherwise may never get justice.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Totten.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.